can always report the facts, but everyone has their biases, their opinions. We're all gonna, report things in a certain way that is a little bit indicative of our viewpoint and our views. And so that's really critical to be aware of, just as a consumer of the news as well.
Welcome back to Gen Z Unplugged. We are so excited to share our conversation with Virginia Allen. We talk all things border, immigration, reporting, podcast hosting, and we even get into the online dating scene. So we are thrilled to have Virginia on, and we hope you all enjoy this conversation. Virginia, thank you so much for coming on Gen Z Unplugged today. When they told me that you were coming on the show, I was like, Virginia Allen, I feel like I've seen that name. And then I looked you up, found you on Instagram, and realized that I had briefly saw you at a Young Women's Leadership Conference several years ago, back in 2022. So it's great to see you again. It's great to have you on the show. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, you've worked for Heritage for several years. Now you host Problematic Women, the podcast with the Daily Signal. Mm-hmm. Share a little bit about yourself, how you got to working with the Heritage Foundation in the first place, and what you're doing today.
Amazing. Well, Hannah, Lauren, it's great to be here. I'm so excited. The work that you all do here is phenomenal, and it's always such a joy when you get to kind of join and lock arms with partner organizations, and there's certainly that relationship exists here. So thank you guys so much for having me. So yes, I have been living and working in the Washington, D.C. area for about 7.5 years. I moved to D.C. after I graduated from college. Actually was a missionary in South Africa for a year, and then felt like the Lord was like, Washington, D.C. is your next step. So going from Africa to D.C. is a little bit of an adjustment, but it was great. It was wild, and ultimately ended up interning at the Heritage Foundation. And then they were kind enough to give me a job. And so I worked for Heritage on their comms team for 2 years. And then I transitioned onto the Daily Signal team, which was founded by the Heritage Foundation. It's a news outlet. And I have had the privilege of just having incredible mentors there, bosses. I always say it would have been really helpful if I took a journalism class in college. Didn't. I studied political science, use a little bit of that for any poli-sci majors out there. It's sort of helpful. It's not really that helpful for life, but it's a great learning experience. But have loved the experience for the past 5 years of reporting for the Daily Signal. Right now, I cover border and immigration issues, Israel, some national security issues, and then, like you mentioned, Hannah, I have the privilege of co-hosting Problematic Women, which is a conservative women's podcast where we talk about everything from news of the day, what's happening on Capitol Hill, what Melania Trump is up to, dating, all sorts of fun things. But the idea behind that show is that as conservative women, as women who hold to traditional values, who believe in the value of life and are pro-life and the value of the family, really the principles that our nation was founded on, we are problematic to leftist feminism. And we just really embrace that title, and we talk about the news and what's happening in the world from the perspective of conservative women for conservative women.
That's right. Yeah, wow, it's fascinating. So much to get into there. And we're going to talk about news, media, all of that good stuff. But first, I want to hear a little bit more about your mission work in South Africa.
Yeah, I tell every single young person I meet that's thinking about doing any sort of gap year, especially if it's overseas, absolutely do it. I think it's a critical opportunity. You grow so much when you're thrust into a completely different culture, and you just have to figure it out. I was really, really blessed to work with a small ministry in South Africa, and they had just started an intern program. And so there was 4 of us, one poor guy, Matt, who put up with 3 girls for a year. He learned a lot about women.
There's always a funny ratio on mission trips
always.
Like that. Yeah, it's always like 90-10 girls. Yeah.
God bless that. We prepared him well for marriage. He's married now. But it was a great experience of working mainly with kids and youth. So we did kids club programs, health education in the schools. And it was one of the first times that I really understood what people meant when they said, you're blessed to be born in America. Because we hear that as Americans growing up constantly. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure. Blessed to be an American. I get it. But then you go to a country where when you pick up the phone and call their equivalent of 911, you don't know if anyone's going to come. And even if they do, they're probably not going to be very helpful. You go to the hospital, you have no idea what kind of care you're going to get. Even at, so South Africa has public healthcare, but then they also have private. But even at the private hospitals, you really don't know what kind of care you're going to get. Driving at night is really risky because of safety concerns. Obviously, South Africa is in the news a lot right now. And it has always been a pretty dangerous country, increasingly so, unfortunately. But just the personal growth, I think, that you get from those international experiences, it just can't be replaced with anything else. I formed lifelong friendships. And I think from a spiritual perspective, for those of faith, it is so really forming. And you realize one of the biggest things that I walked away from in that experience is realizing that Christ is enough and that he has to be enough, because you walk into poverty-stricken areas of the world and the immediate response, I think, as a Westerner, is I want to fix it, for these poor kids that have so little. I want to solve it. I want to make sure they have a hope and a future. And that's beautiful. And maybe you can be a part of totally transforming a couple kids' lives and getting them out of poverty. But for the masses, the majority of, the kids, the youth that I interacted with, they're going to be born and raised in a township of about 20,000 people that is going to deal with poverty for their entire lives. And that's the reality. And so those are times when you have to be like, okay, even if their reality, their physical reality doesn't change, them knowing you, Lord, them having a relationship with Christ has to be enough. And it's so humbling. It's like, oh, that's kind of what missions is bringing the gospel in Christ. But when it's like, oh, like I literally can't fix this. God, your presence, your involvement in this community has to be enough. It's very, very humbling, but it also takes the pressure off of you. So all that to say, if you ever have the opportunity, for anyone listening, if you ever have the opportunity to jump into another culture, whether it's missions or Peace Corps, or you grow so much, you learn so much about yourself. Can't speak of it highly enough.
Yeah, what? I'm glad that you brought that up in the beginning, and you asked her that question about that mission trip, because I think so often, like as Americans, the reason why we're facing so many of these issues is because we've taken the blessings, the freedoms and liberties that have been gifted to us by God. These God-ordained freedoms and blessings, we've taken them for granted, and we've forgotten, who and what has made this country great. And I even remember growing up, like being, 8, 9 years old, complaining about a meal or not wanting to do something. And my dad would always show me these pictures of, young kids in Africa or any third world country that was truly suffering, that didn't get to have any meal that day or hadn't had a meal in several weeks and couldn't even have clean, fresh water. And you look at a lot of even just college students and even grown adults in America today complaining about some of the most petty things. And then you show them those pictures and be like, we are blessed. Even homeless people in this country, like that's like wealth to people in these third world countries. So talk about that for a second. I mean, do you kind of see the correlation between the issues that we're facing today, especially on college campuses, especially among young people, kind of having a correlation to taking the freedoms and liberties that we have for granted in this country?
Oh, there's no doubt. There really is no doubt. I mean, you look at the issues, quote unquote, issues that we're dealing with in America, and so many of them are luxury issues. It is a luxury to be able to, quote unquote, ask yourself, am I really a boy or am I a girl? And like, if you're starving and you don't have food, that's not really a concern. Right. Like, we have created problems in some ways from this place of comfort. And I think the only remedy for that is both, I think, some kind of real world humbling, a recognition of our past, of our history, of those that have gone before us, of the sacrifices that individuals have made, whether, in war, sacrifices our parents made for us, really realizing where we have come from and how so many individuals have fought for what we have today in this country. And, I'm at a point where I do think for some people, college is absolutely still a good, and that, for some careers, you have to go to school, you need higher education. And I'm really anticipating that I think in the next decade, we're going to see a resurgence in the trades, because more and more young people are waking up to the fact, and more parents are waking up to the fact of like, why would I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for a college degree to just be essentially indoctrinated with leftist propaganda, told my country is terrible, and if I'm white, I'm probably terrible. But instead, why don't we consider some of these fields that actually pay really, really well, have great opportunities, and you can be a part of, in some ways, building up our country further just in practical ways. So I think there's a real shifting. I'm optimistic. I think even with what President Trump is doing with ending a lot of funding to universities because of anti-Semitism on campus, I think this is a real wake-up call for universities like Harvard to say, okay, what are we actually preaching? What are we actually teaching our students? Now, hopefully there'll be a course correction. I'm not going to hold my breath for that, but money talks. And so it is a powerful tool, I think, to try and bring some course correction. But it's been a long road to the point that we've gotten to. I mean, this goes at least back to the 1970s, if not long before that, of this very, very progressive agenda that has been pushed on, specifically on young people. And I think for so long, people thought, oh, if it's pushed on young people in colleges, like maybe they'll be a little crazy in college, but like they'll get into the real world and they'll adjust. Some of them did, but many of them turned around and became the college professors that then taught the next generation. And so the ideology has just furthered and led us to where we are today.
Wow, so interesting. And I agree. I think we can't hold our breath about it, but hopefully we will start to see a change in the way education is doled out. And kind of to your point about how it's a luxury to question if you're a boy or a girl. You think about if anybody's into psychology at all, you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And once you've reached a certain level of meeting every single need you have, that's when you start to question things that you should have never questioned in the first place. So it's interesting. We will see how education turns. You touched on something interesting too, kind of in the realm of education with students. We kind of had this impression that students would get out of college and reset their minds to be much more like the average person, but they aren't that way. And I've always heard that journalists specifically are part of this elitist class from elitist universities. So what has your experience been working in journalism with people who are from these woke institutions? And then how have you fit in as a conservative, specifically as a conservative woman?
Yeah, I think Washington, D.C., especially the field of journalism in Washington, D.C., most people just auto-assume if I'm traveling, like, oh, I live in D.C. and I'm a journalist. They're like, oh, if I'm speaking to a liberal, they're like, oh, that's great. Hold Trump accountable. And, they just go off and like, yeah, okay, think what you want to think. But it is interesting. And I think the biggest tool that I think is really, really helpful is forming community. And I've been really, really blessed to be in an environment where I get to work with some other conservative journalists and kind of lock arms with people that are driven by principles and not by just the sway of what happens to be going on in the sphere of news and policy at the moment, but really have a grounding. So I think that is such a saving grace when not only for yourself, why you believe what you believe, whether it's in the field of journalism or any other occupation, but then also surrounding yourself with people, even in a crazy, wild environment that also have that same grounding and foundation is just a really, really important tool and a beautiful gift. And then I think, as a consumer of news as well, I listen to my fair share and read my fair share of moderate lefty outlets because I think it's helpful to know all sides. And I think it's very, very helpful to just be aware of what people's agenda is. And you discover very quickly in the world of journalism, everyone has a point of view that they're coming from, even conservatives. We like to say we can be totally not biased. We can just totally report the facts. We can always report the facts, but everyone has their biases, their opinions. We're all gonna, report things in a certain way that is a little bit indicative of our viewpoint and our views. And so that's really critical to be aware of just as a consumer of the news as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point that you made. I want to talk about the border for a second because you've been to the border. Correct me if I'm wrong.
About 5 times, yeah.
Been to the border several times. And have you been, obviously under the previous administration, have you been recently under President Trump's administration? And if so, highlight for our audiences just a little bit about the differences that you've been able to see. Obviously, we're hearing a lot of it in the media briefing room with Caroline Leavitt, who's doing a phenomenal job. But you're hearing all these questions and people are asking, but you've seen it with your own eyes, the differences. So talk about that. And for our audience, it's just kind of the compare and contrast of what we're seeing from the media versus on the ground.
World of difference from 1 year ago to today. So you go back, even look at March 2024, there was almost 190,000 crossings at the border. Fast forward to March of this year, we have just over 11,000. So dramatic change in numbers. So we're talking over a 90% decline in illegal aliens arriving at our border. So the first time I ever went down to the border, it was about 3 years ago, and my mind was just blown because you were hearing about it on the news and people were talking about, these groups of illegal aliens that were arriving. But to see what was essentially a well-oiled machine of illegal immigration right before my eyes, where you'd see a group of about maybe 10 illegal aliens cross across the Rio Grande River, and then a Border Patrol bus or truck would roll up, pick them up, take them to a processing center. They'd be processed in a period of about 48 hours and then released onto the streets. And it's like, this is insane. This is totally insane.
They're just released.
They were just being released.
Period.
Exactly.
Okay. Wow.
Because if they've claimed asylum, for them to get their asylum hearing, that's going to take months. And because the Biden administration repealed Trump's Remain in Mexico executive order, what Trump had been doing under his first administration, and what again is happening, is that individuals who came into the country and said, hey, I'm here to claim asylum, they said, excellent, great, you can wait for your hearing in Mexico. Makes sense. But what the Biden administration did was just release and say, okay, come back and arrive for this hearing on this date. Some people don't show up to those hearings, but even more so, people that show up, there's all sorts of appeals that you can give. You can ask for more time to get a lawyer in order to work through your appeal. So you can just keep stalling. And, because the courts were so maxed out, it just got pushed and pushed and pushed. So we know that there's about 10 million people that came into more than 10 million people in all likelihood that came into our country, remained in the country under the Biden administration. So that was, routinely what I saw when I went down. One of my most vivid memories at the border, I think, was in 2023. And I was in Yuma, Arizona, went to the border at 3 a.m. And that was when folks crossed. That was when the cartels were pushing individuals across, was for some reason in the middle of the night in Arizona. And went down a line of about 50 illegal aliens. They were from 9 different countries, African countries, Asian countries. It's like, this is just insane. And then again, the buses pull up, take them to processing centers, well-oiled machine. So about 2 months ago, in late February, early March, was down in the border in New Mexico, was on a ranch, didn't see a single border crossing, spoke to a rancher who said, on his property, he was like, on average, we had about 50 people crossing every single day across my property under the Biden administration. He's like, we're down to about 3 now. So just dramatic decline. And obviously there's the national security threat. But then, you think about the lives that this impacts. And for so much of our property along the border, that is ranching land, it's farming land. And for these individuals that, essentially have been living in fear for 4 years, not knowing who's crossing, and people that cross in those more remote areas, cross on private land, they're crossing there because they don't want to get caught. They don't want to be apprehended. And they pose often security risks to the country, to anyone they interact with. So it has just been absolutely night and day, and really empowering for our men and women in law enforcement, for our Border Patrol agents, because they went from having to sit in offices and process all these asylum claims to now they're actually able to be back in the field and doing their job, which is obviously a huge morale boost, that they're actually allowed to follow the law and do what they were hired to do.
Yeah.
Wow. It's unbelievable how tangible the effects of the Trump administration have been. You see it in so many different ways. And something that I've noticed over the past few years, just throughout the Biden administration and the years prior, is this decreasing sense of safety that I feel. How I told you, I grew up in McLean, Virginia, which one of the safest zip codes, like right outside of DC, one of the richest area codes in the country. But over the past few years, I would stop going on walks by myself. I don't want to run around the neighborhood. And I have no other explanation than I keep hearing these cases of illegal immigrants who are attacking women in the streets. So I have already started to notice a shift in kind of the level of fear because criminals are actually being prosecuted now. But so many young women who kind of claim the leftist liberal identity would tell you that open border policies aren't dangerous and they aren't bad for women. So what do you say to people who make that claim?
I mean, you just look at the stories. I mean, the tragic stories of Laken Riley, of Rachel Morin. I mean, of people who were going about living their lives, like you said, going on runs and walks and exercising in quote unquote safe areas. Laken Riley was on a college campus, the property of a college campus, when she was violently attacked and murdered. Rachel Morin in Maryland was out on a public walking trail when she was violently attacked and murdered. So there has been a direct correlation, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, Lauren, when you say that there's a shift not only because the Trump administration is arresting and deporting specifically criminal illegal aliens, but also there's this awareness among prospective criminals of, there's actually going to be accountability now instead of the slap on the wrist that we so frequently saw under the Biden administration. And even I think in the American public, there has been a recognition that really started, I would say, about 2 years ago when we saw some of my colleagues, folks I've worked with at the Heritage Foundation, have used the term rogue prosecutors. These prosecutors that simply don't prosecute. They make up their own rules. And there's whole categories of laws that they just simply say, we're not really going to prosecute for that. If you steal up to $900 worth of stuff, that's fine. If it's over, we'll come down on you, but not until then. It's just been really bizarre, and we've seen, I think, in the past couple of years, the American people getting increasingly frustrated about that because that's an issue that affects Republicans and Democrats. Doesn't matter if you have a family member that gets robbed, if your car is stolen, God forbid someone in your family is murdered. That. It doesn't matter where you stand politically. You just recognize our laws have to be followed and there has to be prosecution. So slowly but surely, we're seeing these rogue prosecutors weeded out, and a desire, I think, in the American public to follow the laws. But there's still a lot more work to be done on that front. And then, you get into the issue of asylum and, not asylum, but of sanctuary cities. So sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, like in California, where they've simply said, we're not going to follow the law and we're not going to cooperate with ICE agents in order to bring individuals to justice. And that is not only a slap in the face to law and order, but also to the American citizens that live in that community, because essentially you're putting out a welcome mat to criminals to say, hey, you can find safe haven here. And, those cities that are sanctuary cities, also there's a correlation with high crime rates. And I think that's no accident.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's going back to what you said earlier too, like these issues that we're talking about every single day. Heritage is talking about, the Luce Center is talking about. I mean, so many different conservative organizations and Christians are coming out speaking up about these issues. And you think to yourself, how in the world have we gotten to a point in society where these are even topics of debate? And obviously, I believe this is a spiritual battle between good versus evil, moral versus evil that we're fighting. I mean, even you look at the joint session of Congress where you have the left versus the right, and you look at DJ Daniel, 13-year-old suffering from terminal brain cancer. President Trump, gives him this special Secret Service badge, and the left didn't clap. No news network, no legacy media outlet other than maybe Fox News and Newsmax were cheering on DJ Daniel. You have CNN, MSNBC kind of putting it back on President Trump, saying this was horrible that you did this, spinning the narrative, of course, as they always do. But going back to what you said, just the taking the freedoms and liberties that we have for granted, and sometimes, there's George Washington, he said, sometimes it takes a little pain to bring the truth to light. And unfortunately, I think that is such a realistic quote. I mean, you look at COVID-19, that in and of itself woke so many people up. You look at all these issues, it's finally people are waking up, realizing that the left is not for women. I mean, you look at abortion, we just saw a new statistic come out saying that the abortion pill is 20 times more harmful than what the FDA reported on. Yeah. So all of these statistics, and I want to get back, going back to the border for a second, because during the joint session of Congress, you mentioned Laken Riley, Jocelyn Ungrit, the left, the Democrats, the legacy media outlets, refuse to stand up and just applaud their moms and their family members for standing up for women and young children that have been abducted, raped, kidnapped, and some of the most egregious things happen in them at the border that the left has refused to talk about. So if you don't mind kind of going back even just to like the women's rights issue that's been touted by the left and even the feminist movement, which has nothing to do with, protecting women.
Yeah. It's sad because I think what has happened is that a political agenda, political ideology has just gotten in the way of truth, quite frankly. I mean, you would think that standing up and honoring the parents, the mothers who have lost their kids to illegal aliens, that would just be basic. Like, okay, even if you have different views on border and immigration issues, you take the time to honor those who have been personally affected by tragedy in their life. So I think it's a sad place that we find ourselves in our country. And while I think we are much more polarized than we've been in a very long time, we know that, throughout history, there have been times where we have been pretty polarized as a country. And I have hope that we can come back to a place of unity and really of common sense. And I actually think that is slowly starting to happen under the Trump administration. Yes, because of Trump's policies, but so much so because of how well President Trump did in the election of winning not only, the electoral vote, but also the popular vote. And because he campaigned on this platform of common sense, I think that the left recognized, oh, there's actually a lot of appetite for just common sense principles and policies. It's fascinating, though, to watch because now some on the left, I think, are recognizing, okay, we need to be careful about how we talk about these issues. We ourselves need to get back to common sense. And then you have your AOCs and your Bernie Sanders and your Al Greens that are just doubling down. And they're like, oh, no, we're just going to take this further. We're going to go further on the leftist propaganda, on the socialist propaganda. We're just going to lean in. And in many ways, the Democrat Party is kind of at a bit of a crossroads. And I would say the Republican Party was a few years ago as well, of kind of deciding, okay, are we going to stay a little bit more in our traditional box, or are we going to embrace some of these ideas that really the MAGA world, the Trump world has brought to the forefront? And I think there's been a good balance struck there, but so much has really been embracing the policies of common sense and America first. There's a real appetite for that. And I think Republicans are recognizing that. Well, now I think the Democrats have an opportunity to define themselves, to figure out what their path forward is. And I think if they go the route of the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs, they're going to self-implode because there's not an appetite for that among the American people, because they watch things like that joint address and Trump honoring family members of those who, had family members that were killed by illegal aliens. And that's just such a turnoff. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Everyone recognizes, what on earth are you doing to stay seated, to not clap for these individuals and to not see, essentially, kind of to blind yourself to what is evil and just like, I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to engage. Like, just have the decency to call out evil is evil and good is good. So it's an exciting time to be alive in that regard. I think there's a lot of political shifts happening, and we've seen wild shifts, like I said, for the Republican Party in the last several years. And I think we stand to see, especially in the next 2 years, the Democrats really forced to make some decisions about where the future of their party is headed.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I think the concept of common sense is just a perfect way to sum it up, because that's been so corrupted. And so I'm excited to see a restoration of that and hoping that'll trickle down into all areas of life. And one area where we really need it is the dating scene.
Oh, yes.
So I'm very excited.
On in,
yes.
Lauren.
So we on the show, we really want to focus on issues plaguing Gen Z specifically. Yeah. And dating has to be up there. Probably the top 3, if not the top 2. So a lot of, I know my friends and kind of just girls that I'll talk to, they don't know how to date after college, because you go from this huge dating pool of all these different people from all these different places to a city where you're really only meeting people at work. And if you go to church, you're meeting them at church. But outside of that, I think a lot of people feel hopeless. So would you give us an idea of what your experience has been?
Sure. So this is so fun. I'm like, I don't know a single woman that doesn't love talking about dating. Like, I feel like we all just are like, pull up and like, let's get the popcorn out. Like, maybe pour a glass of wine. I don't know. But dating, you're absolutely right. It is a wild scene. I so often, when I hear about like my grandparents' experiences dating, I'm like, oh, couldn't we go back to that? It would be lovely to go out on Friday night and go dancing and beautiful. We're not there. So we live in a world, definitely have a lot of online dating. And so I'll share a little bit of my own journey and experience. I, like I said, had been in the Washington, D.C. area for about 7.5 years. D.C. is known for being a hard place to date. Most cities, I would say, across the country. Bizarrely, it's like there's a ton of people, and yet they're just right now proving to be really, really challenging to actually go out on dates, not even necessarily to find a significant other, just to even get asked out feels like a job and a half.
Right.
So here's what I will say about the online dating side. I 100% understand the resistance to it, and I was very resistant to online dating for a while. The bonus and the best part about online dating is that you're dealing in a pool of people that at least are single, hopefully, if they're online, and actually want to be in a relationship. And if you use a platform like Hinge, it's specifically asks you, are you looking for a long-term partnership? Are you looking for marriage? Or you're looking for something short-term? So right away, you kind of seeing people's cards on the table. So I tried online dating a couple times in Washington, D.C., met nice people, but I was like, it's not going great. So probably about a year ago, I'm slightly addicted to Reels. It's a problem. I need to get off Instagram. Here we are. I'm a millennial. So I saw this reel of a guy that was like, I went on like 20 dates in one day, and he just like booked back to back to back coffees, like 20 minutes between two coffee shops. And he just like ran back and forth between the two of them. I was like, I don't think I can do that. But I feel like this idea of rapid fire dating and essentially playing the numbers game, there's something to that, because you hear a lot of people say that, like, just play the numbers game. It's a numbers game. And that's not very, that's not a beautiful idea. Like, I just have to like check numbers. But there's a reality to it that's like, all right, yeah, like if people are not asking me out at work, or, if you're a teacher and you mainly work with women, or like it's hard to meet people. So it's like, all right, let me try this. So it was January. I had gone on a date that I had kind of high expectations for. A friend had set me up. Didn't work out. It's like, all right, fine. We're going to do this. We're going to go all in on online. So I chatted with one of my friends who met her boyfriend online. She gave me a couple great tips that now I will like stand by, because they really do work. So I'll speaking as a Christian woman who's setting up a dating profile and specifically using Hinge. 3 rules. One is you don't send likes or messages or whatever the platform is. Like, you don't swipe. You let the guys come to you.
Be pursued.
Good. Because like even online, guys still want to be the pursuer.
Yeah.
And anytime that I experienced like, oh, let me send like a like or message, nothing. Absolutely nothing. So don't waste your time. Secondly, get a little bit vulnerable in your prompts. Like, no one really cares what kind of toppings you like on your pizza. Like, actually share a little bit about yourself, not like overly, but be honest about something. So mine that I got a little bit vulnerable on, I forget which question I used, but I talked about the importance of thankfulness and how thankfulness has played a really big role in my own journey with the Lord, and how I so often forget that that's like the most powerful tool in my own personal life and journeys when I'm having a bad day, just getting back to that place of thankfulness and thanksgiving. So just something that gives people a little bit of insight into who you are, that feels a little personal. And then finally, where was I going? I just lost the last one. I'll keep moving and come back to it. But that setting up your profile can be, I think, critical in it's like one window. People have a very, very short period of time as they're looking at your profile. And so you're trying to give them just a really specific, quick window into who you are. Oh, I remember the last one. If your faith is really important to you, Christian, Jewish, whatever it might be, it's not enough for them to check a box. It is not enough for them to check off, I'm Christian or I'm Catholic, whatever. They need to say specifically in one of their prompts that, they're looking for someone who's pursuing the Lord or who, goes to church on Sundays or, whatever it might be. Doesn't matter how they phrase it, but they had better have something about their faith in a prompt, not just checking a box. Checking a box means nothing. So using those principles, I was like, all right, we're going to do this. I'm going to go on as many dates as I possibly can in a shorter period of time. So met great people, started messaging, went on 8 dates in 8 days.
Wow.
And tried to keep it all very, very low stakes. So they were like, 1 hour coffees. A couple of them were phone calls. And if there wasn't like a major, they really weren't like, I met all nice people, because for one, if you kind of start off by using that initial formula, you kind of weed out the crazies and the so met a lot of nice people. Some people that was like, yeah, we don't need a second date. Quite a few people that like, yeah, let's do a second date. Let's do a third date. Again, trying to keep it all very, very low stakes. Some guys I even told, hey, I'm playing the numbers game right now. And they were like, okay.
I love the honesty. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, we're all in this together. Like guys do. No one likes online dating, but I think this was the first time that I was like, this is wild. And it does feel like work, because when you have to I was blocking off about an hour every day, because, you're getting like 100 likes. And then, among those, maybe there's 4 people every day that you want to respond to. So, there was a point where like, you're sending about 20 messages every day and just like, so you kind of have to think of it as work, but it is in a way fun. Like dating is fun. It should be fun. If it's not fun, take a little bit of a step back, but also recognize it's work. So did rapid fire 8 dates, narrowed it down, and just kept kind of narrowing it. So there was a period of time where I started getting really stressed out because I had met like 3 amazing guys. It's like, this is getting a little bit much. I have to like narrow, and like you start to not feel great about messaging 3 people for an extended period of time. You're like, I need to figure out my life. What am I doing here? So narrowed. And then for about the past 3 months have been consistently dating an awesome guy. And at the end of the day, I think dating, yes, it is like we date in order to find our life partner. And I think a lot of society, especially Christian community, has just made it all really, really high stakes. And a lot of guys have been under this pressure of, and I'm speaking again specifically coming from, I grew up in Christian schools, I went to a Christian university, and so that's the perspective I'm coming from. But there was so much pressure for guys around like, you got to protect the girl's heart, essentially like, don't ask her out unless you know you're going to marry her. And it's like, no. Let's bring down the temperature. Let's just be humans getting a cup of coffee. Let's get to know each other and be intentional with questions. I think one of the most powerful tools in dating is question asking. And there are now 1,000,001 awesome resources for that online and reels and all sorts of things. But just, I literally have a list on my phone, and the guy I'm dating right now has a list as well of just like questions that we want to ask each other. And it's a great tool to just be intentional about both fun things, but then also going deep and asking some real heart questions early on in the process. So that has been my dating journey in a nutshell as a 32-year-old in Washington, D.C. who wants to be married and has definitely had some disappointing experiences. But I think the biggest thing is just the recognizing, yes, it is work, but it's work that's really worthy of being done, and don't take it too seriously.
Wow. It's so true. You nailed it with the Christian culture of dating. It's so weird.
I don't know what to
do.
It's hard. It's so hard. And I think we're getting better because there's been a recognition of, okay, I think we went a little, because it was in response to like the 1970s of just free love. And there was obviously a recognition of this is not working. Like, we can't do this. But then the pendulum just swung so far to the other side, and it came from a good heart and a good place. But I think it ended up making men really scared to pursue women and raise the stakes so much for women, where it was like, oh my gosh, he asked me out. Let me go pick out my wedding dress. Like, slow down, woman.
I know that side of it too. It's both sides.
It's both sides.
Everybody needs to just chill a little bit. But so many good pieces of advice in there. I think people are really going to appreciate that. Just as a final question, I'd love to hear if you have any advice, professional or personal, that you would give to a young woman who's fresh out of college and she's considering moving to DC to work in either news and media or maybe to work on the Hill in policy.
Absolutely. Number one is, as soon as you get to, whether it's DC or another city, find community, because you're going to burn out really fast if you don't have community. And whether that's a pickleball club or church or a running club, it doesn't matter. But you really can't last in a city, I think, and do it well as a young single person without people that you're locking arms with and running with. It's just so necessary and needed. So I think that's on like the practical side. I think on the professional side, always err on the side of being more professional as opposed to less. There's a lot of changes that have happened in the professional world very, very rapidly. And especially when you're going into environments in Washington, D.C., where you have these vast dichotomies in offices, where you have, like military generals that have retired and they're working at think tanks. And then you have a 22-year-old who just graduated college and like they're walking in with their earpods in. And always, as a young person, just err on the side of, I'm going to use someone's last name when I address them for the first time. I'm going to say hello to people. I'm going to give a firm handshake. I'm going to always dress more professionally than I think I need to. Be very aware of those things, because that kind of both stand out. If you aren't professional to the level that someone who could lead to opening some doors for you job-wise, if you're less professional, they're going to take notice. But if you kind of go over the top and you really present yourself well and you speak well and you make eye contact, increasingly the older generation is looking for that because there's a lack of it. It used to just kind of be basic. That's what you did. But now it's something that really allows young people to stand out. So just taking the time to be a little bit more aware of those professional things really goes a long way.
Wow. I'm like blown away by the just thinking about the dating conversation. Like, obviously, I mean, I'm 17 and I've never been on a dating app, and I'm like, wow, this sounds, I think I would be overwhelmed.
Don't go on a dating app until you feel like you need to. Like, it's not bad, but I still stand by the fact that, like, I think organically is the best way to meet people. I have told so many people in my life, family, friends at church, you are allowed to set me up on any blind date. They have full permission, because I'm like, if we allow algorithms to set us up, why would we not allow the people that we love? I have met wonderful people by being set up on blind dates. None of those have transitioned into a relationship, but I've met great people. So the Lord can use anything.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love that. Virginia, how can people find you? If you have any last thoughts, feel free to share them. But how can people find you, support you, and your work?
Absolutely. So you can follow all of my work at the Daily Signal, dailysignal.com. You can also follow me on X at Virginia_Allen5. And then you can catch the Problematic Women podcast both on the Daily Signal YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on Gen Z Unplugged today.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me.
Thanks.